Hey everybody, welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host today, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Rocky Balboa. Now, this movie came out 17 years ago this week on December 20th, 2006. Now, I actually wanted to do this review for the film in 2026, but I actually saw this movie rather recently, I think like about 2 months ago. And when I saw the movie, which I'd seen, like I said, 2 months ago, and it was the first time in like over a year since I saw the movie. I remember distinctly telling myself I got to do a review for this film in time for the anniversary this December. So of course I wanted to wait a little longer, but I just couldn't because after I saw the movie, there was just a lot of things I wanted to talk about the film, and I just wanted to get into here with this review. So here we are now. But I will say some specific things that I remember distinctly about the first time I saw the movie in theaters, and then the things I remember to this day from when I saw it in theaters the first time. And not only that, though, one specific event that occurred before I saw this movie. So I remember, I forgot what film it was that my wife and I had seen prior to Rocky Balboa, but we had come out of the theaters, and of course, when you walk out of the theater, you see a line of posters up against the wall for upcoming films and films that are already in theaters right now. And one of those films that was up there was Rocky Balboa. And of course, I knew about Rocky Balboa. I knew it was going to be coming out. And you know, as you can tell, if you just by looking at this, I'm sure you can see that I'm a massive Rocky fan. And for anyone that doesn't know, and I'm sure a lot of you do that checked out my reviews or even see my show, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, is that I am a massive Sylvester Stallone fan. Like, Sylvester Stallone is my favorite actor of all time. He's literally my number one favorite actor of all time. I love Sylvester Stallone as an actor, as a writer, as a director. I think he's a great storyteller. And of course, I love the Rocky franchise. I mean, as you can see here, I got the shirt. I got a Rocky 2 standee that my wife had gotten for me, and this little bad boy over here too, which is from the Brisk IT commercial from back in the 90s. So I love the franchise. That's my favorite franchise literally of all time. And I have literally all the Rocky films, including the Creed films too, with the exception of the third one, which I just haven't gotten it. Not because Stallone is not in it, I just haven't gotten it just yet, but I will eventually. But I just love this character. I love the franchise. And there's a lot of wonderful life lessons that I have literally gotten from this movie that I still carry with me to this day, especially from Rocky 3, which has to do with the scene with Paulie and Rocky, more or less in the beginning of the film. But with this particular movie, one thing I remember specifically before I ended up seeing Rocky Balboa in theaters was that when I was saying before that my wife and I were walking out of the theaters and we saw the poster for Rocky Balboa, I was excited for this movie. And I'll never forget, and I remember the exact details. I'm like probably 4 feet away from the poster, and I was talking to my wife and telling her that I cannot wait to watch this movie. And I was giving her this whole story about what I had learned about the making of this film, and that I've read some pieces of the script in the Sly magazine that Stallone had a couple of years before all that. And at that point, the film had not been greenlit just yet. He just had like his own magazine and released previews of the script for the fans to know what to be expecting of this movie, and also to build up anticipation for this film. And I bought some of those magazines. I lost them, and fuck, man, I'm pissed. I'm not pissed off, but I wish I held on to them because like I said, I'm a Sly fan. I'm a massive fan of him as a person. So I just whatever happened, I lost. But the point I'm getting at is that I talked to my wife about the film, and then this one dude, I'll never forget. He wore a brown hat, and he had like this red logo on the front of the hat, and he had a brown jacket too, and he wore jeans. I remember that verbatim. And he was looking at the poster, and there's two guys that were walking up behind him, and he was looking at the poster, mumbled something, then he said, "Oh, this is gonna be stupid." And I'll never forget that feeling right at that moment where I said to myself, because I got really pissed off, and I was like, you haven't even seen the fucking movie, and you're already going to make a critique of a film that you have not seen yet, haven't probably seen a footage of it yet, and you're going to say that? Fuck you. And I hope the movie does so good, and I hope it proves you wrong, and I hope this movie is so successful in terms of critics, box office return, that when you walk out of the movie, you're going to be like, holy shit, what did I just say a couple weeks ago? What a fucking idiot I was. I'm going to get fucking right. You're fucking furious at that moment. I'm not like that now, but at that time I was really mad because I was like, you haven't even seen this whole movie yet, and you're already gonna criticize it before you even seen it, you fucking douchebag. The weeks have gone by, and eventually my wife and I go see the movie. I will never forget that feeling that I got when I saw the movie, because this was actually the first and only Rocky film that I ever saw in theater. So this to me was a huge deal. But it was the first time where I got to experience like the resurgence of not just Stallone's career, like, so, you know, that movie put him back in the forefront, but it was more about like having to see the impact that the film and the character had after all these years, and what it's going to have moving forward from there. And especially due to the fact that this is the closing chapter of the Rocky franchise, I was really happy to be a part of that and to be able to watch that, and then watch other people as well too as they saw the films, particularly with one scene that I'll get into in a little bit here. So I was just really happy to be a part of that, and then revisit that film over and over now, because I've seen this movie like easily over 20 times. And to me, this is the second best Rocky film right after Rocky 1. And to me, it's also one of the most underrated movies too, because this is one of those films I remember, like, if you ask somebody what's a film that sticks out for that comes to mind, a lot of people throw in Rocky, Star Wars, The Godfather, which is my favorite movie of all time, you know, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, just you know, a lot of these high profile films. But then when I started throwing in, like, well, you mentioned Rocky, what did you think of Rocky Balboa? Like, oh yeah, I did see that movie. That's a good movie too. I remember that film. And then they'll remember like specific scenes in that movie. But it was always a film that I remember that a lot of people like had it that never bring up. But as soon as I bring it up to them, especially when they mention Rocky, it's always buried somewhere in their memory bank, and then it comes right back out, and they'll remember a lot of other details about the movie that they had forgotten about. But the fact that I mentioned it to them, they'll remember specific details that really had impacted them that, again, they had just forgotten about. So this is one of those stories where I really do believe that the film is really an underdog story in the film in itself, but then watching the film as well too, there's a lot of deeper understanding of the character of Rocky, especially what Stallone was going through at that time, and then be able to relay that into this film and see a lot of the emotional hurdles that their character Rocky has to go through, and no doubt that Stallone had to go through as well too. So it's a very interesting dichotomy of seeing the director's journey and also the character's journey as well too, and we'll just have to close out that part of their chapter there and then begin a new one moving forward from there. So there's a lot about this movie that I will get into. As you can tell, I love this movie, so you already know what the rating is going to be, but I will get into the plot synopsis, and then of course I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. Now long retired, Rocky runs a Philadelphia eatery and mourns the loss of his beloved wife, Adrian. Yearning to recapture a bit of his glory days, he plans to re-enter the ring for a few low-profile local matches. All that changes when Rocky accepts a challenge to fight the world's reigning heavyweight champion, Mason the Lion Dixon. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive for me really is, it's really the experience of going to watch the movie in theaters. Because again, I grew up a massive Rocky fan, literally my whole life. And I've never seen a Rocky film in theaters. And when I saw Rocky Balboa, being that it was the first and only film that I ever got to see in theaters, it was a huge deal for me. But I was really excited to see the fact that Stallone, and if you've heard this story, he's shared this a million times, he went through a lot to try to get this movie done, and he was always shut down because no one's interested in Rocky anymore. No one's interested in him because he was going through a really low point of his career, and there was just not a lot of interest from at least at the time the studio heads were showing to invest into this movie. And it wasn't until a change in management at the time where they said, you know what, let's do it, let's make this film, and then boom, just like that, it was greenlit, and then they were moving forward with the movie, and they were already shooting it at that point. But understanding what he had to go through making that film, and this is one of his most proudest moments too, I should say, and he talks about that in great details in the documentary, among other things as well. But it's interesting to understand that, and knowing that in leading up to watching this movie, that I got to witness something that I've always wanted to be a part of, like a specific moment in time where I would have loved to have seen Rocky when it came out in theaters in '76. I would have loved to have been there to see that change of momentum, not just for Stallone's career, but just in pop culture in general. Because as soon as that movie came out, everyone was talking so highly about this film and how impactful this character was. And in a lot of ways, he definitely changed the course of not just of, I wouldn't say just films, but Stallone's career and many people's lives as well too. There are a lot of people who were affected by this character. One of the greatest examples of that is Mike Kunda, who is known as to be the best Rocky impersonator of all time. And I've actually had him on my show too, and You're So Cool, not too long ago, a few years ago. Great guy too. He has a podcast as well that he talks about all things Rocky with various other people as well too. So he's someone who's very knowledgeable about the character, the history, and also Stallone's history as well too. But what I'm pointing out is that the impact that this character has on not just someone like myself, but everyone else in the country, around the world, it shows you like how important this character is in people's lives. And I really wanted to experience a moment of that, just a piece of that. And I got to do that through watching this movie in theaters, because I'll never forget one particular scene where it has to do with Rocky having that speech with his son that, no one hits harder than life. And it's not about how hard you can get hit, but about you can get hit and keep moving forward, continue getting hit and keep moving forward. Like, that speech is like, it has been welded in people's psyche for a long time, ever since that film was released. For those who's watched the film, it just sticks with them. And that's a speech you'll never forget. But what was interesting is that it wasn't so much the boxing that was impactful, it was the emotional journey that Rocky goes through, and then the advices and the reasons for those advices that he gives in those respective scenes that left a great impression on a lot of people, myself included. And I'll never forget when I saw that scene where Rocky was talking to his son, who, Rocky's Robert, Rocky's son, was telling him that I don't want you to go to this boxing match because it's going to be hard on me and it's going to be hard on you. People are going to make fun of you, disrespect you. Do you not care what people think about you? And then you can clearly tell that he's just not happy with what's going on, because it's going to have a negative effect on him. And instead of Rocky going out and say, well, I grew up with nothing and I gave you everything and I never had, and how can you be so unappreciative, so on and so on. He didn't do any of that. And in fact, he just did the exact opposite of what we would expect, because I honestly was expecting kind of more or less that. And then he's just talking about, I raised you and it was a privilege to be around you. It was an honor. And your mother and I thought you're gonna be the greatest kid, and you were great. But then all of a sudden you let other people tell you what to be, and then you let them guide your life, and now you're unhappy, and so on and so forth. So I remember when I saw that scene, I'll never forget that silence that I immediately felt right away. And then when that scene was done, when Rocky's going back into the restaurant, looking at his son, kind of pissed off, but gets inside the restaurant, and you can see Robert just looking at his dad and just almost feeling embarrassed what had just happened and walking away. I'll never forget looking around in the theater and seeing that not a single person was moving. It was literally eyes on the screen. It was the first time I'd experienced something like that, where it's not the exact, probably the best way to describe it, but the equivalent of that is that when I watched Avengers Endgame in theaters, you can feel that anticipation, especially in that final battle sequence where all the Avengers are lined up for the first time in cinema, and just in general, but just in that epic format where they're going up against the biggest bad guy that the universe has ever known, at least up to that point. And then they're just clashing, and just that excitement of people just seeing their heroes that they've grown up reading and finally being told in a way that is done right, that's done well and done with a purpose, and having a wonderful battle and a very well-earned victory at the end of the day. Now without major losses, of course, but a very well-earned journey that closes out more or less that part of the chapter there. And the equivalent that I can describe what I just said about that, when people are just excited, going, yeah, just feeling that emotion behind it. I saw that, in the opposite spectrum of the silence, the emotional impact where it got everyone to be quiet. And seeing that scene, and then watching everyone's reaction, which was just focused all on that scene, on the screen, I'll never forget that moment. And then when I walked out of the theaters, I distinctly remember people talking about, not just about the film in general, but that one scene where he talks about, where he talks to his son about, keep moving forward no matter how hard life hits you. Like, no one's gonna hit you harder than life, and so on. And I'll never forget that. And then I'll never forget too, right at that moment where I was like, I wonder what that piece of shit said that Rocky Balboa is gonna be a stupid movie. I guarantee he's here right now watching the film. He's probably crying his eyes out like a fucking bitch. And I wanted to see how what he's saying right now about this movie. I was still bitter at that moment. And the thing is that he did nothing to me. So I think about it now. It's stupid how I felt that way about this guy saying that, not knowing anything about the guy. But the fact that he had said that got me pissed off, and I just want to see if it affected him. Now, in hindsight, I definitely would look at it more different and say, I hope he affected him in a positive light, change his ways, and so on and so forth. But at that time, it was more like, I hope you're fucking crying like a bitch that you deserve to be, because you're a fucking loser for talking that way about the film when you didn't even watch the fucking movie. And I guarantee you love the movie now, you fucking piece of shit. That's what I was thinking at that time, despite the fact that I'm watching a movie that Rocky Balboa is saying not to do that, more or less. So anyways, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. But the point I'm getting is that particular moment in the movie made me realize that I will never relive this experience again. So cherish that. It was one of the very few times in my life where I went to the movies having that thought go through my head and experiencing that and letting that sink in. And I'm so glad that I did, because when you watch the film, even after nearly 20 years after its release, there's still people now that repeat that line. And in fact, I remember recently on social media where Stallone was out in Philadelphia recently, and there's this one kid who was repeating that line of that speech that he gave to his son in the movie verbatim and shouting it to Stallone. And I'm thinking, like, that little kid was not even born when that movie came out, and here he is saying it verbatim. He's probably like 5, 6, 7 years old, and he's just shouting and saying it word for word. And I was just like, the impact that movie has on a child that wasn't even there when it was born, and here he is now repeating the lines to the man that wrote the words down. That's got to be an experience for that kid that he'll remember for the rest of his life. And for me to see that, I just thought that's a beautiful moment that the character had on someone else who wasn't even there when they were born, when the movie was released, I meant to say. So I think in that sense, I was happy to be a part of that and then seeing the effects after the fact. Now, as far as the movie is concerned, I love the film. I remember, I'm going to kind of go off on a tangent again, but when I saw the movie for the first time in theaters with my wife, she walked away like, this movie's so depressing. He's just sad the whole time. And I was just like, but did you see the movie? He smiled at the end of the film. And she's like, yeah, but the whole time he was just miserable. And it's just like depressing. It's hard to watch that movie. And I was just like, it's interesting because she didn't say she hated the film. She just didn't like it as much as she thought because it was just so depressing. But I never felt that way about the movie at all. Even to this day, when I watch the film, because I already know what the outcome is going to be. Because even when you watch the film, you know what the outcome is going to be in terms of like the character arc. But it's how you get there and how you effectively tell the story in a way that you keep the audience invested. Despite the fact that my wife was still invested, but she was just didn't process the same way that I did. I think a lot of other people did too, which is a really interesting perspective to see someone else that just didn't look at the same way that I did, and how she was able to see it from her perspective and then not get the same more or less results that I got, where I felt satisfied. And yet she was like, it's depressing. Very interesting. But the story in itself, it basically deals with Rocky, as I mentioned in the plot synopsis, that he lost his wife. And somewhere along the way, you can clearly tell that there are still people out there who appreciate Rocky, but they don't appreciate the person. They appreciate more or less the legend, if that makes any sense. And you can see that when he runs the restaurant, he's talking to the customers, telling them the same stories over and over about his boxing matches with Apollo Creed, with Clubber Lang, Ivan Drago, and the various other opponents he's come across as well too throughout his career. And Mickey's chiming in during the matches as well too, and going through the stories over and over again, and never seemed to have a problem with doing that. He's happy to do it, and seems really not want to say complacent, but just content with it. But then when he sees the artificial fight, where he has seen that there's some spark and interest there, he realizes, you know what, maybe I should get back into that again. But then he's getting back the same hurdles, like, well, you're too old, you're gonna be made fun of, you're a legend, you're gonna be fighting again. What if you get your ass whooped? It's just not gonna look good on you. There's a lot of different things that people are throwing at him, his son including Paulie, which is expected, of course. But there's a different set of hurdles. But then you realize it's not just about him getting back. There's something else going on deep inside of him, which he has a wonderful scene with Paulie in the meat factory, where he says he has a beast inside of him, where you really get to see what's really going on and why he's doing it and how it's affecting him along the way too. And the fact that he lost his wife along the way really, really hurt him. And you get to see it's not just about him coming back to fight because he got the spark in. There's something else going on there that the film does take its time to develop and showing you and making you understand as an audience member, at least it worked for me, to really get where he's coming from. So that way, when you get to the end of the film, it makes sense why it closes off that way. I thought that's brilliant in Stallone's part in taking the time to do that and changing the various drafts he's come across with the story, from having Adrian in the movie to not having her at all, as being one of the major motivating factors for Rocky Balboa in this film. I thought was handled quite brilliantly. Now, one thing I will also point out too is the fact that this film, we actually get to see an older Robert, Rocky's son, where you get to see that the guy is basically avoiding his father for a number of different reasons, but the main was the fact that he's his son, and every time people see Robert, they see his father rather than seeing the person. So you can clearly tell he's just trying to work very hard to get away from that, but is in a constant hurdle that even though when his father wants to go visit him, he's like, stay away from me because I just want to figure things out for myself and just run away from this shadow you cast over me. And you can see that part of the relationship being a major hurdle that Rocky has to overcome too, which eventually does come to meet in the middle. And embrace each other at the end of the day. And I really did appreciate that well-earned part of the relationship too, through that speech that you get halfway through the film, and how it just overall closes out their part of the story too. Really love that as well too. One other character that I'm going to point out here is for Paulie, played by the late great Burt Young. Paulie is a character that Stallone and Burt Young do a really good job in terms of the portrayal and the writing of the character, because the portrayal of Paulie is someone that's obviously very brash, very rude, very disrespectful to a lot of people. But yet, somewhere along the way, you always find a moment of humanity for the character, despite the fact they are never going to change. They're still the same rude, belligerent, and just intolerable person. But somewhere along the way, Rocky looks past all that rubble and finds the real person inside and just holds on to that. And you get to see moments of that throughout this film, where you realize that, oh, I get to see why Rocky keeps him around, because he's actually a good person. So, maybe not a good person in some people's eyes, but there's still a good person somewhere in there. And Rocky understands Paulie better than anybody outside of Adrian. Rocky's the only person that stayed loyal to him outside of his sister. There's a level of understanding that comes with the relationship that you can see where really the crux of relationship is, and where they really stand with each other, despite the major differences in personality, despite the major differences in goals they have in mind, and what their thoughts are as far as life's concerned, whatever else. And I really think that Burt Young is not only a great actor, but does something that I think is very difficult to do, and he was able to do that with Paulie, which I think was why a lot of people love the character. At least I do. Now, I will also point out too, when it comes to the overall arc of the franchise here through this story, is that the various people that you come across in this movie, they all serve a purpose here, and a good purpose at that, I would say. But the most important thing is that when you get to see how these people come into Rocky's life and have an impact on him in some way, shape, or form, one of the most surprising ones for me was Little Marie, who we all seen from the first film, played by completely different actors in the first film and a different one in this movie too. In fact, I think some of you may not realize too is that the original actress that played Little Marie in the first Rocky film, she actually had a scene in Rocky 5 that ended up being deleted there, but they ended up bringing her character back. And what's interesting is that I do remember thinking at one point in the film that if this is going to be a love story where he's going to have a thing with the little girl that he took home when he was 30 years old, and she was probably like in her 13, 14, somewhere around there, it just wouldn't sit right with me. And despite the fact that he's going through a loss to the hardship of losing his wife, for him to fall in love with someone else, it just would take away from the story. And I'm glad he never did that at all. In fact, they even take notice of that as well too, where he was like, hey, listen, even though my wife's not here, but she still is kind of here. And she's like, yeah, I wasn't thinking that at all. He's like, oh, okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I'm glad they put that out there to more or less put it to rest there. So I'm glad that never strayed away from the true essence of the character of Rocky, where he is loyal to his, he's loyal to his wife. He's loyal to, his love, if you will, for his life. If that makes any sense. But I think you understand what I'm reading right here. What else can I say about the plots in this movie? I mean, there's really quite a lot. I will say that the boxing scenes in this movie, they're not the greatest I've ever seen, but I did appreciate the fact that there are some very real elements of actual boxing that does occur, because one of the things about this movie is that the HBO fight that you see in the film, that actually occurred in real life in Las Vegas. I forgot what fight it was in real life at that time, but they actually took on the opportunity to show a real boxing match between Antonio Tarver, who plays Mason the Lion Dixon in this movie, who was a former champion as well, to go up against Sylvester Stallone as Rocky Balboa, and they were actually going at it with each other. And I remember thinking, like, I would have loved to have been there just to be in a boxing match one day and watch it, and all of a sudden Stallone comes out with Antonio Tarver and they're going at it with one another, and it turned out to be a real match, which was used in the movie. And they obviously shot some additional stuff as well too. You can tell with the blue screen behind them, just to kind of fill in the gaps for certain other scenes that they couldn't shoot at the actual boxing arena there. So I thought that was quite interesting how they were able to infuse that together into the movie to make it a very natural looking fight, which it does work out quite well. And the sound effects in the movie too, when it comes to the punching, because one thing that Stallone had pointed out too, especially with Rocky 4, is that it was just the 80s and everyone's just punching really hard. It just sounded like a big massive blow, but there was really no true context about the person throwing the blows, if that makes any sense. Whereas in this movie, he felt like, I want to make sure that when Rocky hits, it sounds like a thud, boom. And then when Mason hit, it sounds like a whip because he's a lot younger. So there's certainly an element of like realism when it comes to the approach of the fight and the sound of the fight as well too, that Stallone was very cognizant of, that he wanted to infuse into the movie, which I think would work quite effectively. The training sequences as well. I mean, believe it or not, this was actually my least favorite of the Rocky training sequences, but it was one of the most, I would say, I think about it in hindsight now, especially when I saw for the first time about 2 months ago. I appreciate it more in time, because I remember when I first saw it in theaters, I liked it, but I didn't walk away like that training scene was mind blowing. I never felt that at all. Not like I did with the first Rocky film, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, especially. This one I felt like was the weakest of them all. Not because it wasn't good, but for some reason it just didn't have that impact like the other ones did, where this one, I felt it, but nowhere near the impact like it did with the previous films like that you have that inspired you to work out. I'm sure if I'm watching this at 60 and I'm seeing Stallone do that, I've been like, oh fuck yeah, I'm training right now. I can see that me. In fact, I'm not saying that's the case for every guy who's 60 years old. I'm not saying that, but I can certainly see myself at 60 watching this movie and being out of shape. I certainly would probably take the approach of like, this movie inspired me, we'll go work out at this age. I could see that happening there, but still a great training sequence there, but not my favorite of the franchise, if that makes any sense. But for me, that's going to be into my positive, because I mean, there's quite a lot that I can get into this film. In fact, this is one of those movies that I'm very, very looking forward to do a commentary one day, which I'm hoping to do down the line among many other films that I plan on doing as well too. So for me, that's going to be into my positives. Now let's get into my negatives. What's funny for me is that the negatives for me are very minuscule, but there have been two things that always stuck out for me. And I'm not saying that they made the film any worse, because they didn't. Because the movie to me is damn near perfect. This is a beautiful film from start to finish. But I remember the first time I saw this movie, when I saw this character, the character of Duke, who was a constant character throughout the franchise. Even to this day, his son is now a trainer, played by I forgot the actor's name, but you've seen it from Remember the Titans. I'm sure I'll have his image for you guys to see. But the character of Duke, who had trained Apollo Creed, in the first Rocky film, the second, and then appearing in the third and in the fourth, he was the one guy that I remember that I thought was like a really pivotal character for the franchise for two reasons. Because in the first film, he pointed out to Apollo Creed that, when he saw Rocky in the meat factory while he was doing the interview for this news organization out in Philly, he saw that Rocky was just going at it with this meat, this sack of meat that he was hitting the ribs. He was just going crazy with it. Not crazy, but going really hard on it. And he saw something right away. You could see it in his eyes. He's like, oh shit, he sees something. And he's telling Apollo, you got to come and watch this guy. This guy means business. He's like, yeah, don't worry about it. Because he's doing some other business negotiations for something else. And he's just like, no, this is some serious shit. This is not some guy we should take lightly. You can tell it in his face right away. In Rocky 2, Duke was telling Creed, when I saw that training footage of Balboa hitting the meat sack, I saw a guy with fire. I saw a guy that wanted it, and you didn't have that. And when you were beating him down over and over again, he just kept coming at you harder and stronger. And no matter how hard and you've hit this guy harder than I've seen any opponents you've ever hit, he just kept coming at you. And it's like, you just weren't the same guy beforehand, because he was pretty much telling you were distracted, and this guy took advantage of it. And now the effects after the fight are still obviously lingering with him. Or if you watch the first two Rocky films, you'll know what I mean. But that character was a very observant character in that particular aspect of the training and the importance of training and understanding the mindset of a fighter that he gives you a glimpse of with Apollo Creed, and then also with Rocky as well too. And then in Rocky 3 and 4, he definitely was a very pivotal character. And in Rocky 5, he was there in the very beginning, and I was like, I wish he was there again, and just being more impactful. So when I saw him in Rocky 6, I was excited to see him, but for some reason, I was really disappointed in the fact that he was just there as a trainer, and that was it. Like, his impact wasn't felt as much as I remember feeling how he was impactful in Rocky 1 and in Rocky 2. And I always felt like that was the one character that could really, really just add something different to the overall story that we're following in this film here, that could have been much more impactful to Rocky in terms of his training, where you could really see that Rocky might have gone through a low point in some parts of his training. Then Duke says, something to him that changes everything. He's like, okay, now I'm going to keep going forward. Or kind of like the equivalent of what we got with Rocky 4, where he was just kind of going through the motions and training. When he saw Adrian come back and be with him after telling him that she thought he was going to lose the fight, his motivation changed. I was like, imagine that, but with Duke, to do that hit with him in Rocky Balboa. Like I wanted something like that to happen, where you can see the importance of this character, why he's there in the first place. Because at this point, he was just there and just there for being there, if that makes any sense. And Duke, the actor that plays him, he's a really good actor too, and a really smart guy as well. I think maybe not know it, but he's a very intelligent guy. And for him to be able to use that in this performance for this film, I think would have been very impactful in various ways that you've already got with this movie. But adding that extra element with him on top of that surely would have made it much more satisfying, at least for someone like myself, because I always felt like that character was used effectively in the first two films. After that, somewhat, and then not very well at all, particularly with this movie too. So that's really the end of my negatives here, because there are some little minor things, but nothing really that important that really sticks out for me that I can point out to kind of go off on a tangent here. But so for me, that's gonna be into my negatives. Now let's get into my rating. So as you already know, I love this movie. This is my second favorite Rocky film in the franchise here. And believe it or not, this is actually not in my top 10 movies of all time. It really should be, at least for me, because there's something about this film that when I watch it, I'm reminded of just the various struggles that Stallone had to go through to get this movie, but the various struggles he also was going through in his life at the time as well too, that makes me appreciate the resurgence he had in his career, where once this movie came out, it was very well received, very successful in terms of the box office. But one other thing I also remember too, that I'll never forget, that I always felt like that I'm not the biggest proponent nowadays for nominating somebody for an Oscar, but there's one actor that deserved an Oscar nomination, at least a nomination, and then definitely an award too. It was Stallone for Rocky Balboa. Rocky Balboa, for me, is one of the most underrated performances by Sylvester Stallone out there, because what he did in that movie, in my opinion, is second to none. He is one of the best out there. And this movie, in my opinion, showcases why he's a really good actor. There are plenty of great performances he delivers out there. Even some of the most insane action films he's ever done, there are some great character moments he does offer in those respective films, like First Blood Part 2, even Demolition Man, Cliffhanger. You know, there's some wonderful films he's done and what are considered to be just balls to the walls action, but there are some moments of character that you get to see that he delivers with those respective films that makes you realize, you know what, this guy is not just a great action star, but he's a good actor, and he does deliver those in moments in certain in a variety of those films. But when you watch a movie like this reminds you, at least for me, why he's, I think, one of the best actors in the world out there, that a lot of people tend to forget that he is really a great actor, a great storyteller, a great writer, and a great director at that as well too. And I'll never understand why his performance was overlooked and not even considered to be a nomination, never be nominated to say for Best Actor in Rocky Balboa, because when you think about that movie and you think about his performance, he delivered one of his best performances of his career, and did it in such an impactful fashion too. And I'm glad that, you know, despite the fact that even though he was never nominated again for that role for this franchise, at least in as far as the sequels are concerned, he was in the spinoff for Creed, deservedly so. But I always felt like his performance in Rocky Balboa was superior than he did in Creed. And Creed, he was amazing, I'm not denying that, but Rocky Balboa really just showcased like why he's so good. I think it's unjustified in my opinion, but what's more important now is that the impact that the character has, that he had written, still carries on to this day. That's probably much more meaningful than a career, than an award would ever offer here. So in that sense, it's kind of a catch-22, but at the end of the day, does it really matter? Probably not, but it would have been nice for him to be given that award, at least that opportunity to be nominated for showing that, hey, you did something really, really good, and we're going to reward you for that, apart from the box office return and the resurgence of his career. So for me, I always felt like this movie is a true underdog story for a number of different reasons, but it's also a great film in general. Not a great sports movie, just a great film, period. So for me, I'm going to give this movie a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, if you have seen this movie, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. I would love to hear what you guys think of the film. When you first saw the movie, did you Did the movie have the same effect on you like it did on me? And are you also a fan of the franchise? I'd love to hear your thoughts again in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, also subscribe to the NRW and hit the notification bell while you're down there as well too. And also follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. You can follow me on my social media accounts. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina. On Twitter, You're So Cool with WRM. And on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas. You guys stay safe out there. Until next time, cheers.